The alien tribe was in a panic. Their societal structure, reliant on the fertility of their women, had begun to crumble. The older wives, those who had once held the tribe together, had been discarded. Their childbearing years were over, and according to the tribe's harsh customs, they were now considered surplus. The younger women, though fertile, lacked the experience and wisdom that the older wives possessed. The tribe's elders sat in a heated discussion, trying to figure out how to solve the crisis. No one could figure out how to reintegrate the older women without compromising the tribe's reproductive future. That's when the human arrived. He wasn't what they expected. When the aliens had sent out a transmission to neighboring species, they hoped for a scientific expert, someone who could offer advanced technology or some magical solution. What they got was a human with an uncanny amount of self-confidence, dressed in a simple outfit that screamed ordinary. The alien leader met him with polite curiosity. The human, with a grin, simply said, "I'm here to solve your problem." The tribe's leaders exchanged confused glances, but they were desperate, so they agreed to let him try. The human's first statement was an absolute bombshell. He offered them his services to help the women bear children. The alien council's eyes widened. They didn't understand human reproductive practices well, but helping them bear children was a concept so vague that it could mean anything from high-tech fertility treatments to some sort of bizarre ancient ritual. They stared, waiting for more details, but the human just shrugged. "Trust me," he said with a wink. "I know what I'm doing." The women, hearing that a human was offering to help them, gathered hesitantly. They expected something involving machines, something sterile and clinical. Instead, they found themselves in the presence of a man whose most advanced equipment was his charm. The human's idea wasn't advanced technology or medical expertise. No, it was something much more human, emotional connection. He would teach them, not through science, but through the subtle power of human interaction, love, care, and physical touch. The tribe's women were skeptical. Some were even disgusted by the implication that a human would be involved in such an intimate process. But the desperation in their eyes made them agree to try. They were willing to do anything to solve the crisis. The human set to work with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, setting up what he described as personal counseling sessions. To the women, this sounded like some strange and unexplainable Earth tradition. Was this some sort of therapy? But the human assured them, "It's not what you think, it's better." The first session began awkwardly. The human introduced himself with a joking comment about human anatomy and how things work differently on Earth. The women, unsure of whether to laugh or be offended, stood in uncomfortable silence. The human continued, "We're going to talk. A lot." He made it sound simple, but it wasn't. The human's charm was evident, but his words were misinterpreted at every turn. One woman, looking bewildered, asked if he was suggesting they try something more physical. "Well, yeah," he said casually. "But not like you think. Just listen to each other." As the sessions continued, the human's double entendres began to pile up. Words like touch, hands-on experience, and warming up flew out of his mouth without a second thought. The aliens, baffled by the suggestiveness of his words, could not comprehend the deeper meaning behind them. "Warming up?" one of the younger women asked with a raised eyebrow. The human, completely oblivious to how strange his language sounded, just grinned and responded, "You know, heating things up emotionally first. It's a big deal." He was beginning to realize his words might not be landing quite as intended, but the women were listening, albeit with very confused expressions. While the humans' methods seemed odd to the aliens, they couldn't deny that something was changing. The once cold atmosphere in the group began to shift. The alien women, despite their skepticism, found themselves laughing at the human's awkward attempts to explain himself. His charm was working, even if in the most unusual of ways. Every now and then, an alien woman would catch herself smiling when the human cracked a joke, a rare and unusual thing for a society as serious as theirs. Despite all of the misunderstandings, the human did manage to teach them something unexpected. He told them that empathy, understanding, and a little bit of humor were key to their success. The older women, long discarded and forgotten, began to open up emotionally, realizing the bond between them and their partners was more than just physical. It was about respect, about giving and receiving, and sharing more than just biology. By the end of the first phase of his therapy, the alien women were looking at the human in a new light. He hadn't fixed their biological issue with some grand technological breakthrough, nor had he followed the traditional methods they'd expected. Instead, he had connected with them on a deeply human level, and that was something they had never considered before. It wasn't the kind of fix they had been expecting, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was the right kind of solution. The human had barely settled into his role when he realized something critical. The alien women, though technically fertile, had emotional barriers they couldn't cross. The human's initial approach of simply offering them his services had failed to hit the mark. He had expected a simple solution, some clinical fix to the tribe's issue, but it quickly became apparent that this wasn't a scientific problem, it was cultural. The alien society had become so fixated on physical reproduction that they'd forgotten the emotional bond that was necessary for conception to truly take place. The women were hesitant, unsure about what was expected of them. "Help us bear children." They repeated the human's words, but they didn't know how to interpret them. Were they asking for artificial insemination? Some complex ritualistic procedure? The human realized they were missing the point completely. The solution wasn't some clinical intervention, it was about emotional intimacy. But how could he explain that to beings who had never considered that connection as important? The human decided to try a new angle. He approached the women with the concept of building a connection, but his language was still misunderstood. "What do you mean, building a connection?" one of the women asked. He stared blankly, realizing how alien his own words must sound. He stumbled over his explanation, saying, "It's about getting to know each other, emotionally. It's about spending time, being close, and communicating." The alien women didn't get it. They were used to direct, no-nonsense solutions, not this fuzzy human concept of emotional intimacy. But the human wasn't giving up. He started to get more creative, trying to use human gestures and humor to break the ice. "Think of it like a bonding exercise," he explained. "You talk, you laugh, you open up." The alien women, despite their confusion, tried to play along. They began to share their thoughts, albeit awkwardly. One of the women, who had been particularly cold and distant, slowly warmed up to the idea. "I suppose talking isn't as bad as I thought," she remarked, her tone softening. The human, sensing the breakthrough, seized the opportunity to continue pushing his unorthodox methods. "Exactly. You talk, you laugh, and you share experiences," he continued. "It's the little things that make a difference. It's not just about physical closeness, it's about understanding one another. It's about being vulnerable." At this point, the human could tell he was slowly getting through to them, but the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The tribe's customs were ingrained, and breaking those patterns wouldn't happen overnight. But the women seemed willing to try, which was all he could ask for. They started to ask more questions about human relationships. What made humans bond? How did they know when they were ready to have children? The human's answers were sometimes too straightforward for the aliens, but his humor worked in ways they didn't anticipate. "Honestly, it's about compatibility," the human explained, casually leaning back. "We don't just pick someone to mate with based on genetics alone. It's more about the connection. If you don't connect with someone on an emotional level, things can get awkward." The women, now intrigued by the human's perspective, began to ask more personal questions, ones that the human wasn't necessarily prepared for. "Do you ever get nervous about your relationships?" one woman asked, her voice quiet. "Nervous?" the human responded with a laugh. "Every time I ask someone out, I'm nervous. But that's part of the fun. It's about trusting the process." The women, to his surprise, seemed to find comfort in his honesty. They didn't just want to know how to bear children, they wanted to understand the complexities of human relationships. The human had thought he was just solving a problem, but in reality, he was teaching the aliens something much deeper. As the sessions continued, the atmosphere in the room shifted from awkwardness to something resembling camaraderie. The women began to relax, their eyes softening as they began to view the human as something other than an outsider. Yet, not everyone was convinced. One of the elder women, who had been particularly vocal about the abandonment of older wives, was resistant to the humans' methods. She argued that the tribe had been fine for generations without such emotional nonsense. "We need to think about the future," she argued. "Not about feelings." The human listened, then gave his response with a slight smile. "I get it. You're all about survival. But survival without connection is just existing. You need more than just procreation, you need love. That's what will ensure the tribe's future." The elder woman, though skeptical, was quiet for a moment. The human's words hadn't landed perfectly, but they made her think. As the days passed, she watched how the women responded to the human's guidance. They were changing, subtle shifts but noticeable. The human had offered them something they hadn't known they were missing: vulnerability, connection, and the space to be themselves. His methods, though unconventional, seemed to be working. Slowly but surely, the tribe's women were learning that reproduction wasn't just about biology. It was about shared experiences, emotional bonds, and trust. The human knew that he couldn't change their entire culture overnight, but this small victory was a start. He wasn't just solving a problem, he was showing them a new way of thinking. What started as an awkward, misunderstood attempt to help women bear children had become a transformative experience for both the human and the aliens. Through his humor, his oddball analogies, and his relentless optimism, he had introduced the aliens to a concept that was foreign to them: true emotional connection. The human might not have been the expert they were expecting, but in his own human way, he had delivered something even more valuable: an understanding of what it meant to truly bond with another being. The tension among the women had begun to fade. What had started as a strange, uncomfortable experiment with the human was now slowly shifting into something that resembled progress. The alien women were starting to see that the human wasn't just a misguided outsider trying to force his ideas onto them. He was offering something far more valuable, a perspective they hadn't considered. They weren't just being asked to bear children, they were being encouraged to connect with their partners emotionally first. It was a concept they had never fully understood, but it was starting to make sense in ways they hadn't anticipated. One of the younger women, a particularly cynical member of the tribe, had begun to open up more than the others. She had spent years believing that the tribe's old ways, those that dismissed older wives as irrelevant, were the only path to survival. She had grown up in a world where reproduction was seen as a mechanical task, a necessary function for the survival of the species, and nothing more. She had scoffed at the humans' love talk, initially, but now, sitting across from him, she began to question everything she had known. "You really believe this is the key to everything?" she asked. Her voice was softer than usual, more vulnerable. The human smiled, leaning back with his usual casual charm. "I don't just believe it, I know it. The connection between two people, it's the real deal. Without it, you're just going through the motions. And let's be real, you can't fake that stuff." He added a wink for emphasis. To his surprise, she didn't pull away or roll her eyes. Instead, she actually laughed, a genuine, unexpected sound that echoed through the room. The other women watched, intrigued. They had never seen her this way before. Still, despite the breakthroughs, not everyone was sold on the human's unorthodox approach. The elder woman, the one who had resisted his methods the most, remained skeptical. "You speak of love and connection, but we do not have the luxury of time. We need more than feelings," she insisted. Her tone was firm, yet the edge of doubt in her voice was clear. "What happens if this doesn't work? What will become of us? What will become of the tribe?" The human understood her concern. "I get it. Time's ticking, right?" He paused for a moment, his gaze softening. "But here's the thing, a tribe that values only biology is a tribe that's missing half of what makes us human, or, well, alien in your case. You need something deeper than just the act of reproduction. You need a reason to stick together when things get tough." He smiled wryly. And let's be honest, things usually get tough. The elder woman crossed her arms, clearly unmoved, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. It was a small shift, but it was there. She had seen the changes in the younger women, seen the subtle improvements in their relationships with their partners. But the problem was this: she still couldn't fathom how something as intangible as emotion could solve their very real, pressing problem. They needed more than just emotional connection. They needed to bear children, quickly, before the tribe faced an irreversible decline. The human understood the stakes. Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe there's a time crunch. But think about it this way: if you're just doing the same thing, expecting different results, that's insanity. You need something different. This isn't about magic, it's about real people connecting, respecting each other, and yes, love. It sounds silly, but that's what's been missing all along. The women were beginning to realize the human wasn't offering some miracle cure or instant fix. His gift wasn't an advanced technology or clever tools. It was in a mindset, a new way of thinking that they had been too focused on survival to even consider. The idea of emotional connection had seemed like an afterthought to them, a luxury they couldn't afford in a world governed by harsh survival instincts. But as they listened to the humans speak, they began to see it differently. Perhaps, just maybe, they had been wrong all along. One of the older women, who had previously been quiet and withdrawn, spoke up for the first time. "What you say, it is hard to understand, but it does make sense," she admitted, her voice soft but growing in confidence. "We have treated our older women as if they were discarded, as if they were useless. Maybe we forgot what they taught us. What they could teach us." The human nodded. "Exactly. Your older women, your elders, have more to offer than just their ability to bear children. They offer wisdom, perspective, and experience. Without that, your tribe is just a group of people. It's the connections that make you a community." He leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with the woman who had spoken. "The real trick is remembering that." The conversation shifted, and for the first time, the elder woman showed signs of cracking. It wasn't an immediate transformation, but it was a step in the right direction. She still had doubts, but her walls were beginning to erode, piece by piece. She had always believed that practicality was the answer to their survival, that the simplest solutions were always the best. But now, she was starting to see the cracks in that approach. The tribe needed more than just a mechanical solution, they needed a holistic one. In the coming days, the alien women began to experiment with their relationships in ways they never had before. They didn't simply focus on the physical act of reproduction, they tried to connect with their partners emotionally, share their fears, their hopes, their desires. And something incredible happened. The tension that had plagued their relationships began to fade, replaced by a deeper sense of understanding. While the results weren't immediate, the change was undeniable. The bond between the women and their partners grew stronger. The human, despite his initial reservations, watched with quiet satisfaction. This wasn't just a victory for the aliens, it was a victory for him, too. His unconventional methods had led them to something unexpected, something that transcended biological function. And though the problem wasn't fully solved yet, the human was confident that they were on the right path. As he looked around at the women now engaged in thoughtful conversation, something he never expected from such a tight-lipped society, he realized he had given them something far more important than a quick fix. He had given them the tools to heal, to grow, and to reconnect. It wasn't just about bearing children anymore, it was about building a future together. The tribe's transformation was slow, but noticeable. The human, once an outsider, had become an unlikely catalyst for change. His methods, though unconventional and full of awkward misunderstandings, had begun to bear fruit. The alien women, now more open to emotional connection, started to embrace the human's ideas. They found themselves laughing more, sharing their stories, and building relationships that went beyond the simple goal of reproduction. The younger women, especially, began to understand that the foundation of a strong family didn't rest solely on biology. It was built on emotional intimacy and trust. The elder woman, the most skeptical of the humans' methods, had been watching from the sidelines. She had been unwilling to let go of the tribe's traditional ways, but now she saw a shift. Her tribe was changing before her eyes. The older wives, who had once been cast aside, were now slowly being reintegrated into the community. Their wisdom was being respected once again, and they, too, were beginning to realize the value of emotional bonds. They had always been there, but now they had a purpose beyond their ability to reproduce. They were the keepers of knowledge and history, the anchors that would help guide the tribe through the uncertain future ahead. But the elder woman was still conflicted. She had fought hard to uphold the tribe's rigid customs, to keep things simple and functional. She had believed that the future of the tribe relied on practicality and efficiency. But the human had shown her that it was something deeper, something she had never truly considered. She was struggling with the idea that connection and love could hold more weight than biology and survival. The human, for his part, had learned more than he expected from the aliens. His initial arrogance had faded into humility, replaced by a newfound respect for their culture and their way of life. He had come to realize that the real solution wasn't about forcing a quick fix. It was about allowing the aliens to evolve on their own terms. His job was never to fix them. It was to offer a different perspective, a way of thinking that could help them navigate their challenges in a more holistic way. The human had grown fond of the tribe. Despite the awkwardness and the misunderstandings, he had come to appreciate the sincerity and determination of the women. They weren't just a species struggling to survive, they were individuals with unique stories, emotions, and dreams. He had begun to understand that his role here was more than just a quick solution. He was helping them redefine what it meant to be a community, to be a family. As the days passed, the tribe began to embrace the changes. The women who had once been abandoned were now being cared for, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. The younger women were learning from the older ones, seeing them not as relics of the past, but as vital contributors to the tribe's future. The bonds between the women and their partners grew stronger, not just because of their shared experiences, but because they had learned to appreciate each other on a deeper level. But the true test would come when the tribe was forced to face the reality of their situation. The problem had not been fully solved. Despite the growing emotional bonds, the tribe still faced the issue of their dwindling population. The human knew that time was still a critical factor, but he was confident that the path they were on, one built on emotional connection, was the right one. It wasn't about rushing into solutions, it was about building a foundation for the future. And that foundation, he believed, could only be built through trust, understanding, and love. The elder woman, after watching the progress the tribe had made, approached the human one evening. There was no anger in her eyes, no resistance. There was only curiosity. "You've shown us something we never thought possible," she said quietly. "But we still don't know if we can make this work. We still need more children." Her voice was soft, but the urgency was clear. The human nodded, understanding her concern. "I get it. You need results. But sometimes the best thing you can do is trust the process. Trust that the changes you're making now will lead to something greater down the road." For the first time, the elder woman didn't argue. She didn't brush him off. She just nodded, a slow, thoughtful motion. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe you're right." The human smiled, not out of pride, but out of a sense of relief. He knew the road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he believed in the tribe's ability to adapt. The emotional bonds they had formed were the real key to their survival, not just for reproduction, but for the survival of their culture. The tribe would need more time, more patience, and a lot of work, but they were on the right path. The following weeks saw even more shifts in the tribe's dynamics. The women, once divided by age and reproductive ability, now worked together. They shared their wisdom, their experiences, and their hopes for the future. The younger women, inspired by the older ones, began to look beyond just bearing children. They began to see their role in the tribe as something more significant than they had ever imagined. They were not just vessels for reproduction, they were part of a greater whole, a community that needed each member to thrive. The human watched all of this with quiet satisfaction. He hadn't expected to become so invested in their success, but here he was, helping a society that was finding its way. And though he would soon have to leave, he knew that the impact of his time with them would last far beyond his stay. The humans' work here wasn't about quick fixes or scientific solutions. It was about shifting perspectives, about showing these aliens a new way of living and thinking. As he prepared to leave, he looked at the women who had once been so distant and cold, now laughing, talking, and sharing their lives with each other. The elder woman, who had once dismissed his ideas, was now standing side by side with the others, offering her own wisdom, not from a place of authority, but from a place of shared experience. It was a subtle change, but it was a change nonetheless. The tribe had begun to rebuild itself, not through biological means alone, but through the strength of emotional connection, the kind of connection that the human had brought with him, perhaps without even knowing it. The human didn't have all the answers. He didn't solve every problem. But he had shown them something important, that the future wasn't just about what you could produce. It was about what you could build together.